So to get started with our tiny art show, I'm going to kick us off with a short painting video of a landscape. You are welcome to either paint along with me or use this as inspiration for your own creation. So the first thing you're going to need to do is open up your tiny art kit. That's going to come with some paint, 2 brushes, and a canvas. It's also going to come with this easel. If you prefer, you are welcome to paint on your easel and set that up like this. However, I prefer to keep my canvas flat when I'm painting. So I'm just going to take my easel and put it to the side. I'm going to save it for my display later. You're also probably going to want a cup of water and some paper towels for when you are changing colors. Today I am also going to use this little sponge brush. However, if you don't have one of these, you can definitely use a Q-tip. It's going to be very similar. And I'm just going to use this to give us a little texture. All right, so I've got all of my stuff set up here, and I'm going to get started with my landscape. These are just some simple and easy instructions. Anybody can follow this. I'm going to start with my flat brush. And I'm going to just put down our background. So I'm going to start with some light blue and light green. So I'm going to move this first palette out of the way. And I'm going to use the blue and the green from over here. Starting with my green, I'm going to make my grass, my horizon line right here. The nice thing about acrylic paint is it does build up very nicely. So you can start with a transparent layer and you can always add more to it. So this is just giving me a base that I'm going to develop my landscape on. So I'm going up not quite a third of the way up. Let's see, this is half, about a quarter really. And it's okay if my edges are a little bit rough. Now, I prefer to also paint the edges of my canvas. I think it just gives it a little bit more of a finished look. But you're welcome to do just the face of it as well. It's all preference. So I'm just following that with my light green. And that keeps me from getting this blob on the end also, because I can kind of wipe that down. I'm trying to go mostly in the same direction. And the same thing on the other side. All right, so I've just got my base layer there. I'm just wiping off the rest of the paint that I had on my brush, giving it that first layer. I'm not really concerned if it's too straight or not. I'm going to be adding in some mountains in the background later that I can touch up my edges with. So I'm going to stay with my flat brush, but I want to switch over to the light blue. So I am going to go ahead and wash that off. All right, I'm going to switch over to my blue now. This is my sky layer. You can see I accidentally flecked a little bit of green there. That's all right because I'm going to be going over it. Bob Ross famously says there are no mistakes, only happy accidents. So leave yourself some room to have those happy accidents. We can always cover those up later when we get to our clouds also. So the key here is I just don't want to leave any thick clumps of my acrylic. Acrylic is a little bit thicker than a watercolor or a tempera paint. So it's going to give you a little bit more texture. But it still layers very nicely. So again, I'm getting those edges as a way to kind of smooth out the extra paint I've got here. And since we're working with a small canvas, it's going to dry pretty quickly. But just beware of little smudges from your fingers if you do choose to pick it up. I'm going to let my blue layer a little bit over my green. Again, since this is just my base layer, I'm not super concerned about those edges. I just want to make sure that I don't end up with anything clumpy. All right, I've got my base layer down. I'm gonna let that dry a little bit. And then I'm gonna come back with these colors again, just to make it a little bit thicker. And then we'll come back with our shadows and highlights. Again, since this is a smaller canvas, it is going to dry more quickly. But if you are a little crunched for time, a nice trick is to use a hair dryer just to hit it over the top and make that time pass a little bit faster. My trick is I'm just going to use the fast forward button, and we'll come back to you guys when it is ready to move forward. All right, now that I've given it some time to dry, I'm going to keep going with another layer really similar to what we were already working with. I'm going to go ahead and turn my paint around so it's a little bit easier for me to access, and open those back up. We don't want them to dry out. All right, the other thing I should have mentioned, I am using a piece of scratch paper here just to protect my surface. You may want to use a tablecloth or a piece of newspaper in order to keep your surface clean as well. Now I'm just doing the same thing that I did before, adding another layer of the same color. You already saw me do this, so we're going to do this on fast forward this time. I'm going to slow down again here for a second just to show you something that I'm doing. I am using these short strokes to add more paint to my canvas, and then long strokes to thin that paint back out. So I like to use a lot of long strokes when I'm working on my background. And here's something to watch for. This is just a little piece of the brush that I got stuck in there, so I'm just going to lift that out so that it doesn't become part of my finished piece. All right, and we're going to speed things back up here. All right, I gave that a little bit more time to dry. I'm going to swap out my palettes here because I'm going to be working with some blacks here next. All right, and I'm also going to switch my paintbrush, and I'm going to use this round brush next. All right, there we go. So I'm going to use this round brush next, and I'm going to add in some mountains along my horizon here, right in the back. I'm just going to give these a little bit of jagged peaks. My suggestion here is you can always add more, but you can't take away. So start with mountains a little bit smaller and see if they're the size that you want them to be. And if they're not, you can always make them bigger. But if you make them too big, black is a little bit harder to hide than some of our other colors. Alright, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. My big peak is going to be on this side. I'm just shaking my brush a little bit to give it sort of a jagged natural edge instead of just straight down. So as we know, mountains don't have perfectly triangular edges. And I'm okay if I leave a little bit more texture on my mountain, since this is a little bit, again, more natural. I'm just going to try to make my bottom edges a little bit more even. All right, I'm going to take a look. I feel pretty good about that. All right. While our mountains are still wet, we're going to use a wet on wet technique, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just when you add wet paint to a surface that's already wet in order to make it blend a little bit better. So I'm going to clean off my brush a little bit, but I'm not too concerned since I know that I'm going back for the same color. I just don't want to make my palette have too much black in it. And then I'm going to reach for this dark green. so that I blend in my black a little bit into my grass. These can be a little bit tricky to open. All right, I'm going to close up my black. So it'll blend in. I'm using really short strokes on my black here, and I'm picking up a little bit of the black as I go. I'm just adding a little bit of green. Trying to work quickly here so that it doesn't dry so much. That's just going to make it look a little bit less stark. I'm not going all the way over the black. I'm just giving it some little touches, little highlights. This mountain here is already pretty dry, so it's not blending quite as much. This one's more wet, so I can pick up some black over here. I'm going to do another wet on wet here. But I'm going to go back. I'm going to open up my light green and blue from earlier. I'm also going to open up my yellow. My dark green, and my dark blue. Alright, so since we started with our grass before, that's where I'm going to start now as well with my wet on wet. So I'm going to make my brush wet first, and I'm going to take a little bit of the color we are already using and just add that back onto the canvas. I'm going to dot that in a couple of places, especially places that I feel like are a little bit thinner, where the paint didn't cover quite as well. I'm just dabbing this on so that I have paint to pick up when I go back with my other colors. Alright, so now to add some depth, I'm going to add a little bit of dark green, doing the same kind of technique. I'm just sort of dabbing it on here. I'm going to go a little darker on the shadow on this side, I think. I'm sort of patting that to give it some texture. And you can see the way that the paint that was already on the canvas picks up and makes some shadows and highlights. I can use that to clean up my horizon edge also. And then I'm going to clean my brush a little bit. I'm going to go in with my yellow for more highlights. And just like I did more dark over here, I'm going to do some more yellow over here. So I'm just sort of tapping it. Not like those long strokes we had before. And the more you tap it, the more it's going to blend in. So if you want it to be really blended, you want to touch it a lot more. But if you want it to stand out more, you can let it be by tapping the canvas a little bit less. Oop, I picked up a little bit of the black there. That's all right. Grass comes in lots of colors. So you can see I've just added a little bit of depth. I'm tapping all in the same direction, so it almost looks like the grass is blowing in the wind. So I'm kind of going in at a diagonal. All right, I'm pretty happy with that. So I'm going to leave that to dry there. I'm going to clean off my brush, and I'm going to use a similar technique on the top. I'm going to close these two. I'm going to open up my white. Now you can make a lot more shades if you blend your colors, but I wanted to keep this tutorial nice and easy and show you how to use the kit right as you received it. So I'm going to do the same thing where I put down my base layer using the light blue that we used earlier and just get that on the canvas kind of all around. Add my darker blue. You can see it's blending really nice. I'm using longer strokes since this isn't quite as textured as my grass was. I just want to get some depth in my color. Not so worried about texture, so I'm going to blend this a little bit more. Alright, and then I'm going to take just a little bit of white. Kind of add that in here, here and there also. You don't want it to look too flat. You want it to look like a nice natural landscape with lots of different colors in it. All right. I'm going to let that dry for a while. And then I'm going to come back in with my finishing touch. We're going to make some happy little clouds. All right, so we gave that some time to dry. Earlier we did the wet on wet technique. Next we're going to do some clouds though, and we don't want our clouds to turn blue. So I waited until this canvas was completely dry to move on to my next step. And now we're going to go ahead and use that Q-tip or round sponge from earlier. We're going to use that to make some clouds. Okay, nice big fluffy clouds. I'm also going to use my flat brush, and I'm going to go in with that first just to lay the base of my clouds so that they don't get too big and fluffy and get away from me. So I'm going to start with my flat brush, and I'm just going to give myself an idea of where I'm going to do those clouds. So this is kind of just the bottom edge of my cloud. I'm using that tapping technique again because I want to give it a nice natural edge. And I'm going to do a nice big one here. All right, and that's going to be most of my clouds, I think. Maybe I'll do a little one right over the top of my mountain. All right, that just gave me an edge. And now I'm going to use my dotter here. So if you have a Q-tip, go ahead and dip that in your white. We're going to use that just to build up our clouds here. You're going to actually have a little bit more control with the Q-tip as well because it's going to be a little bit smaller. And this is a great way to add some texture and keep those edges nice and bouncy like a cloud. So again, I'm just kind of dotting over it. I'll let this one overlap a little. And I'm going to go back in with my flat here and just give my clouds a little bit more definition. So I've got my big clouds there, and I'm pretty happy with how those came out, but if you wanted to give them a little bit more depth, you can use that wet on wet technique again, opening up your light blue and adding a little bit of depth just by dotting that around in your cloud to give it a little bit more shadow. The areas where the light is coming through, where your cloud's a little bit thinner, you can use that to shape up your cloud a little bit. All right, and there we have it. That is our easy tiny landscape. So I'm just going to take a second and clean up my area. And there we have it. This is our completed piece. I am displaying it on the easel that comes in the Tiny Art Kit. And I hope you enjoyed this quick tutorial of a little landscape. We hope this inspired you to make some tiny art of your own, either by painting along with me or making something of your own.